Chernobyl under attack, unexpected and possibly disastrous drone attack. Munich Security Conference 2025 started, and did Trump really concede to Putin even before the real negotiations started? This and more in our today's episode. Let's go. And we'll start with the news number one, at least for Ukraine right now, is that late night Thursday, a Russian attack drone struck the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, damaging the protective structure of a reactor 4. The same reactor that exploded in 1986, causing one of the world's worst nuclear disasters. President Volodymyr Zelensky reported the attack, emphasizing that it was a deliberate strike on a site of immense historical and environmental significance. Fortunately, the Ukrainian State Emergency Service confirmed that radiation levels remain normal despite that damage. However, the attack raises serious concerns over the security of nuclear facilities in territories where war is going on and the potential for catastrophic consequences. Ukraine's presidential office head Andriy Yermak has commented on this accident, noting that many representatives at the Munich Security Conference are angry, this is quote, about the accident because it was Russian accountability that the plant had a disaster in the first place. The whole world helped to eliminate the consequences and save people in Europe then from radiation, and now in 2025 they struck the sarcophagus with an explosive drone.
The atmosphere right now is that everyone is very angry about this news here in Munich. Not concerned, as is often the case, but really angry. Because in the 80s, the whole world helped the Kremlin to eliminate this tragedy. When Moscow threw unprotected people into radiation, Gorbachev received robots and equipment and scientists. Then the whole world invested in the shelter, and today these Russian idiots have launched a drone at it. Andriy Yermak, head of the Office of the President of Ukraine.
The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, has since verified the incident, stating that their team on site heard the explosion and saw a resulting fire. The assault not only escalated military tensions but also served as a chilling reminder of Russia's disregard for global nuclear and environmental safety. Zelensky pointed to this attack as further evidence that Vladimir Putin is not preparing for peace negotiations but instead ramping up for aggression, with 133 drones launched across Ukraine that same night. Russia's strategy of relentless aerial assaults continues unabated. Let's hear what President Volodymyr Zelensky himself has to say about this accident.
Повітряними силами, що це був за удар, там, я думаю, що у вас є вже всі деталі, але дрон йшов на висоті, що цікаво, на висоті 85 метрів. Мені здається, що це важливо розуміти, що радари не бачать цієї висоти. Тобто це дає можливість, також буде слідство обов'язково, і я буду знати більше деталі, але це дає нам сьогодні можливість говорити про те, що якщо радари не бачать на цій висоті, що вони спеціально це робили. Тобто це не значить, що якось дрон змінив напрямок, тощо. Все буває, так? Все буває в час війни, але важливо, що йшов на такій висоті, де радари не бачили, і удар був саме в саркофаг, і саме в день початку, фактично в день початку Мюнхенської конференції, безпекової конференції, удар в цей небезпечний, найбільш небезпечний об'єкт.
And as the investigation will move on, we move to other topics of this day. In a shocking diplomatic move, Donald Trump announced that he had spoken with Vladimir Putin and would begin peace negotiations immediately. His statement sent shockwaves across Europe, particularly in Ukraine and its closest allies, the Baltic states, Poland, and other Eastern European nations. Criticism has poured in from officials across all of the region. Many views this as an alarming development that could pressure Ukraine into an unfavorable conditions and settlement while strengthening Russia's position, so basically securing a Russian victory in the war, God forbid. Former Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis warned that Europe is at a crossroads. Either it takes the lead in supporting Ukraine, or it allows Putin to claim victory through diplomatic coercion and so move on. Many European leaders fear that these rushed talks could result in a deal akin to Minsk III or Munich 2.0, as you can say, that one that leaves occupied Ukrainian territories under Russian control. Experts agree that for peace talks to be legitimate and effective, Ukraine must be involved at every step. Latvian diplomat Imants Lēgis emphasized that any agreements reached without Ukraine's active participation would be a failure from the start. Estonian ambassador Anneli Kolk reiterated a long-standing principle: Putin only understands strengths, as stated long ago. Any negotiation must come from a position of Ukrainian and Western military superiority. Otherwise, it risks becoming a surrender rather than a peace settlement. And I'm not surprised that the Baltic trio, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, are the first in line to defend Ukrainian sovereignty in possible negotiations, as they are the most likely future victims of a future Russia aggression against NATO in case the Russians secure some kind of victory in Ukraine now. And we are moving to the topic of the Munich Security Conference 2025. There have been speeches by J.D. Vance, Wang Yi, a platform with President Zelensky and the American senators speaking jointly on different questions, including Ukraine's security and possible security guarantees with American senators and the public. Our friend Henry Keane was there. He heard it all live, and he has some thoughts to share with us. Henry, you're on the screen.
Right, well, first of all, thank you so very much for having me, Pablo. Indeed, first of all, things are really intense here. The schedules of high profiles are really packed with meetings and interviews. I mean, 150 diplomats, really, what would you expect? 60 heads of state. But yes, it happened. Yes, it was of utter importance. What was discussed and what is known for, well, I would never think I would ever say that, but as Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State of the United States, said, answering the question if he thinks that Ukraine can regain Russia's occupied territories, he said everything is possible. And this is exactly the idea in the air right here on the venue. Anything is possible. He talks onwards, of course, and there's intense volcano interests of sorts colliding here, and these interests are too hot at the moment to predict the shape that they will cast after cooling down. But we will keep you posted on that. You see, this is why I'm here, actually, to get some of the high profiles interviewed while hot and intense, so to then in time compare it with the reality. Absolutely. Well, Vance's speech, well, my personal feeling was it was a lesson of parental advisory. I'm sorry for that. An indoctrinating slap in the face of Europe, and strange examples. But you know what? My advice is just watch it. That gives you all of it. Watch it and suit yourself. I expected that question. I haven't seen them. Moreover, nobody I know through colleagues did. But what is absolutely clear is that even if Russians are here, which is absolutely possible, by the way, from now on, they are going to be visiting any major event in the world just like that, in disguise and through the back doors, so to say. So it's no matter if you have a tank, everyone still knows you are a thug and a terrorist with a tank. And if you are driving Rolls-Royce on a daily basis, everybody knows this is money, and money is stolen, and no one speaks to you, at least publicly. Another thanks goes to you, Pavlo, for this very interesting question. I have not a clue what Kik Halak actually meant by saying that. Well, neither I know to what extent knowing that you have cancer, but not acknowledging it, actually helps you to recover. Well, peace in Ukraine, in exchange for peace of Ukraine, is it a way out of an impasse? Could be, that I don't know. But what I know, and I want to stress out, that great powers are looking for ways out. That is obvious. And Ukraine is not a dog that would dent into any boat. Ukraine is participating in the dialogue. That much is clear, and it's visible, and that is encouraging. Well, to give it to you in one piece, a great reformation of Europe is looming. You can have seen an interview with my colleague Andrews Kubilius, High Commissioner for Defense and Space Military. I mean, with my colleague Vitaly Sizov, he did that great interview. So we can obviously say that economically, peace through strength is indeed, it is working. Then a dialogue after strength. You see, so solid security guarantees for Ukraine, that is what is looming and coming. Munich security guarantees are going to answer how exactly Munich Security Conference is going to answer how exactly this is happening. So, for example, EU from 200 billion in defense budget will level up to 320, and then more to make it more than 3%, maybe 5%. So this is multi-billions of investment. That is briefly what is planned. You will see Europe stepping up, as Ursula von der Leyen has said in her speech. So, thank you very much, Pablo. We'll keep you posted. We talk very soon.
Thank you a lot, Henry, for this report from the burning places in Munich. I believe they are very hot right now with all these discussions and after all these meetings that took place today. And we are moving on to our next guest, Mr. Jay Smart, with another compelling analysis of the Munich Security Conference. And what audience did Mr. J.D. Vance, Wang Yi, and others try to target at that international event? Greetings, Mr. J. It is a pleasure to see you in our studio. And as you could have heard, we are holding this record in my home studio because a Russian missile has hit a couple of days ago our UATV studio, and it is being refurbished right now. So our today's wrap-up episode is continued in this home form.
Well, I'm sorry about that. I like that studio. It was a very nice studio, but Russia destroys everything that's nice and beautiful.
Yeah, and I hope that we are able to rebuild it quite soon. And to that question of rebuilding itself, the Munich Security Conference, which has happened today, it was kind of unexpected turn by Mr. J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. He was talking about religion, culture, about morals, and not talking about war in Europe and the war of Russia against Ukraine. Also, there was a speech by Mr. Wang Yi of the Chinese People's Republic, where he stated that China can buy oil and gas only from Russia because who else would sell such big amounts of fuel to China? There's simply not a single supplier like that. And then there was a roundtable of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky with American senators. They were discussing some possibilities of post-war work between the United States and Ukraine and the ongoing peace negotiation process and security guarantees. Please give us some insight on all of that, if you have one, and some remarks on the Munich conference as an important event.
Well, it's certainly an important event, and I think we all expect that today and tomorrow there's going to be a lot of news coming out, and it's going to be important news. Now, what is not surprising to me is the fact that the United States representatives came with their own message, with their own objectives, and we should expect that. So what's very important, and I always say this as somebody who studies international relations professionally, my PhD is in international relations, is that whenever we see what a country says or does, we should try to understand the motives, not by what we see or we perceive as being the country receiving those actions, but rather what's going on domestically. Like, what is the reason that they would do that? And usually a lot of things make sense where otherwise they wouldn't make sense. So why would Vice President J.D. Vance today decide to talk about culture, religion, other things? I know everyone in Ukraine is expecting Ukraine to be the center of attention, but it's because that's what got him elected. He understands that's what his electorate at home wants to hear, that he's talking about these things that are unpopular in Europe or perceived to be unpopular in Europe in the eyes of many conservative Republicans. And so by talking about them, he's hoping to bring attention to himself and to the White House for being defenders of these values overseas in Europe, which they view as being far left and godless. And so this is the reason he does things like that. Now, what does it mean actually for Ukraine? I mean, how should we interpret all this? Obviously, the Chinese are signaling that they want to have the secondary sanctions taken off of Russian oil. You've seen that Russia, like India, after Trump took office, stopped buying Russian oil. You mind, oils are bought as futures, so you buy it in advance. But they had already indicated that they didn't want to buy more Russian oil because they feared more sanctions. And I think that the Chinese are testing the water and hoping that JD Vance or Americans will say, you're right. We got to help our Chinese friends because we want to do business with them in the future. Well, let's just take away those sanctions. Now, what does this actually mean in foreign policy? What's going to happen next? The truth is, we don't know. The truth is that we have to wait and see. But there's a lot of signals at this point that the U.S. is taking a trajectory that's going to be a far, far departure from that we saw underneath the Biden administration.
So basically, what you're telling me that the new administration is far more proactive, and at the same time, you cannot guess what will be next. So they are unpredictable, alongside with being very, very active on the global stage. So even the old Europe doesn't know what to expect from their long-lasting partner and blood ally, if we can say so, after 2 world wars fought together, the United States.
Well, I think that it's fair to say nobody knows what to expect really, and anyone that tells you otherwise is, I think, probably trying to interpret things as best they can, but it's unlikely that they have a real clear knowledge of what's going to happen next. The U.S. Senate is very clear. Even the Republicans in the U.S. Senate, keep in mind the former colleagues of J.D. Vance just a few weeks ago, uh, they seem not to be very clear what's going to happen next. So if the Senate leadership, Republican Senate leadership, is not sure, I'm absolutely certain that European partners are also not sure. And, I understand this ambivalence, this lack of clarity is not a great situation for anybody, but it's the reality of where we are right now. So I think at this point, the new administration, the new presidential administration, is still collecting information to decide the next steps. I would hope, of course, that they'll be cautious in how they take those next steps and gain as much information as possible before making any decisions that would be rash or to the disinterest of the United States and obviously to disinterest of our colleagues.
And Mr. Lindsey Graham, the senator of the United States, has, I quote, said, if Ukraine signs the rare earth minerals deal, then Trump will defend that deal and subsequently defend Ukraine with security guarantees because, it's a deal for the United States. It is profits for them. What do you think on that quote?
So, I don't know to which degree Lindsey Graham knows this to be the case versus it's a speculation. But Senator Graham obviously has been a longtime supporter of Ukraine. I think that there's also a very interesting element of the rare earth metals that's worth mentioning. If you look at the supply of them in Ukraine specifically, they're almost all located in the occupied territories or in the areas where the current fighting is taking place. It's in southeastern Ukraine. So it's right there on the front. At present, there's no real ability to open mines there or to somehow to get those metals out due to the fact there's ongoing fighting. So it does raise a question. Is there a strategy to this that goes further ahead than we realize? For instance, if the U.S. realizes that, yes, it's promised these metals or the ability to be able to exploit this territory, but currently there's fighting, well, doesn't that, or currently there's occupation, doesn't that mean, though, that the U.S. should try to get those areas deoccupied in order to be able to get those metals? Because as long as they stay in Russian hands, obviously the U.S. will never see anything. So perhaps there is another strategy here that we just don't see. Maybe the strategy is now Ukraine should be able to ask the U.S., listen, we cannot continue to fight the war forever and just lose lives to get your territory back because now you have an interest in this territory. It's not just ours, it's also something you're interested in. Give us the long range weapons, take away the restrictions, give us as many ATACMS as we need, give us as many HIMARS as we need, give us as many air defenses we need, so that we can actively go in there and destroy the Russian positions, smash the Russian military, liberate that area, and at which point, it's back open to business. But at present, Ukraine has no real ability to give those rare earth metals to anyone because there's a war going on there. So I would hope there's a dark, I should say secondary, and a darker strategy, which is that the U.S. will be able or be persuaded to then support Ukraine, not out of just goodwill, but out of economic interest.
And I have this interesting idea that it may not only be a military means of disrupting Russian positions there and ousting them out of the occupied land. It could be a diplomatic means. So many representatives of China in the United States are talking about diplomacy and that goals should be achieved with words, not with weapons. Uh, do you see a negotiated deal where Russia leaves places of possible American interest in the east and south of Ukraine in exchange for something, for example, a neutrality of Ukraine, which is already in place, but we have the course to NATO fixed in our constitution. So, do you think that bargaining neutrality and Ukrainian position for American interest in territories, so Russia leaves them, is possible?
Everything is possible. And I think there's something really important we should also note about how these sorts of things usually work negotiations. So, and Donald Trump is actually, uh, he's a very confusing figure for many people. But at the same time, there is one thing that you can notice from his first term as president and just his general background is that usually he sends a lot of smoke signals, things that don't necessarily make sense. You know, he'll say one thing, they contradict himself the next day. His one representative will say one thing, the other representative will say something different. And it's actually part of a strategy. I don't think it's just confusion. I really don't, after watching him for this long. I think that's intentional because it leaves your opponent trying to understand what's going to happen next. And they're not really sure what's going to happen next. And that's a little bit destabilizing. What I think is very likely to be happening right now is that what the Americans are saying, whichever person it is, it's the vice president or someone from the Senate or from the White House or for Elon Musk, or if it's the Chinese, they're all playing a role in this. They're all playing roles to put the Russians in a position where the Russians think it's advantageous to begin negotiations. We know that Russia has not wanted to start negotiations. So what I interpret all this as being today is simply that they're trying to compel the Russians to start negotiations. And frankly, the Chinese are the only ones that have the real influence over Russia to do so. The Chinese, as you know, are the biggest economic partner of Russia, the largest purchaser of their oil as well. And so without China, Russia would be in a very, very difficult situation. So I think that, and actually this is something that Trump himself even said a few months ago, that working with the Chinese would be keen to end the war in Ukraine. So I think that what we see going on now is a coordinated dance. They're all working in tandem to convey something to Russia.
So you mean they're trying to lure possibly the Kremlin into the negotiation process and then use some policies possibly and tricks to make these negotiations profitable for the West? Is that your course of thinking?
Well, I think that they are going to lure the Russians into the talks. And from there, they're going to have to see what they get. And it's very unclear to me why Ukraine would part with $500 billion worth of goods unless it got something in return. I don't think it's just to pay back previous cost. I seriously doubt that. I think there's going to be more to it. There's got to be more to the strategy. So far, even then they say very outlandish things like Ukraine shouldn't join NATO or the 1991 borders are very difficult to obtain again. I think that this is all signaling for Russia. This is not being signaling. This is not being said for the Ukrainian population or the American population. And once again, as I said, you can always look at what's going on domestically to understand what's going on internationally. And in the case of what people say in international relations, typically what we always have to understand, there is a specific person who is supposed to be the recipient of the message. Everyone else might hear the message and try to interpret it, but it was being said for somebody. There was specifically somebody whom they wish to get that message to. In this case, I think what the Chinese are saying or the Americans are saying, our message is not being sent to the Europeans. This is not so that the Latvian prime minister gets the message. No, it's not directed to them. It's directed to Vladimir Putin. And they're trying to coalesce and to coerce him into joining peace talks.
Thank you very much. That was really insightful. Let's end our talk today on this note and hope that the future negotiations and Munich Security Conference will bring real security and peace to us in the first place in Europe and to the whole world. It will rebuild somehow the rules-based order, because the Chinese were talking about rules-based order in the UN, so they would like to see those rules back into place and global stability too. Thank you again, Mr. Jason, for being today in our studio. Well, that seems to be all for today. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel and support us in this time when our studio is being refurbished right now. It was Pavlo Stelmach from my home studio hosting this episode of Wrap Up. Like, share and subscribe. Remember, stay strong and don't let propaganda win.